Hello and welcome to Sustainability Uncovered from Edie, the monthly podcast for anyone working in or passionate about environmental sustainability. Coming up in today's episode, which is all about renewable energy. More and more businesses are turning to on-site solar to cut their carbon and their energy bills. But what does that process involve? We get top tips from Kingspan and Zestec Renewables.
It's not just a case of when the industry was in its infancy, putting a PV system up on a roof and expecting and hoping that it would perform. It's now actually being able to prove that it is performing in line with those expectations.
And just over 2 years ago, nations pledged to treble global renewables by 2030. How has progress taken shape since then? The CEO of the Global Renewables Alliance gives us a progress update.
We'll be pushing for increased ambition this year. We're looking at a target of 35% of electrification by 2035 could be possible, unlocking enormous opportunity for consumers, both residential consumers on transport and heating, but also industrial consumers with electrification.
All of that and more on this episode of Sustainability Uncovered. Hello and welcome along to Sustainability Uncovered, hosted by Edie, the UK's longest running business-to-business media brand focused on all things environmental sustainability. It is coming up to the end of March 2026 and you're listening to the voice of Edie's content editor, Sarah. I'm joined in our podcast studio today by Sidhi, our senior reporter. How are you?
Hi Sarah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm getting there. I gather that I've had a less tiring week just gone than yourself.
Yeah, I was out and about at our awards last week, which was a fantastic evening. I think everybody enjoyed themselves a lot, but essentially it was just an evening to celebrate sustainability professionals for the work that they've been putting in. We had this amazing speech given by Sir David King, who received our Lifetime Achievement Award as part of the ceremony, and he called ED Awards the Oscars of the sustainability industry, and I thought that was really cool. But yeah, his speech was also really powerful and just struck the right note about how important it is to celebrate the little wins on this journey of the massive challenge that is net zero.
Yeah, it's easy, I think, to be all go, go, go and to always look at the challenges, and God knows we're going to look at some challenges in the episode we have today, I think. And I've also been looking at a mix of celebrations and challenges on the news desk while you've been busy with that. So in terms of challenges, I've been looking at the sort of ambition/impact gap of corporate sustainability strategies. I've been looking at why people are fighting about product carbon accounting with some help from Sidhi as well. But then we've also had some good news worth celebrating as well. So in the month since we last podcasted, the net zero carbon building standard has been launched, and the Climate Change Committee has had a new briefing out setting the record straight on the cost of Britain's net zero transition, i.e. that it is lower than the media would have you to believe, as long as it's well organised. So lots going on, mix of challenges, mix of opportunities, and obviously we've both been reading, I think, a lot of commentary trying to make sense of how the war in the Middle East is going to impact sustainability and the energy transition. Cities nodding at me.
No, definitely. That's just been our focus as well. And I think going forward, something that I will personally be exploring a lot in feature format, what that really means for, say, the Colombia talks at the end of April and just wider fossil fuel commitments that nations have.
Yeah, there's a lot of breaking news headlines every day, but I think for those of us working in energy management and sustainability, it's always worth sort of taking a step back, looking at the strategy, looking at what's out there, looking at progress to date as well as challenges. So it is all of that relating to the energy transition that we're focusing on in today's episode, which we are hosting in partnership with Kingspan. So in the face of the energy crisis, a lot of people are looking more at self-generated renewables and energy efficiency, and that sort of movement had already been building as technology costs had been falling, and amid, I say, the last energy price crisis that started in 2022, but that's still we're still not completely
no,
out of that.
And then now it's the Middle East. Yeah.
I know. But for whatever reason, we know that a lot of organisations across the UK and Europe are working really hard on on-site solar and energy efficiency. So we're going to start by looking at that and then zoom out across the world to look at different types of energy in a conversation with the CEO of the Global Renewables Alliance. So let's get started with on-site solar. I haven't got a full pop quiz because Matt's not here, and what's the fun if I can't see his face when he loses, to be quite fair.
I mean, to be honest, he usually wins these, so I'm glad he's not here.
I literally have one question, which is what proportion of rooftops on commercial industrial buildings in the UK do you think have solar panels on it as a percentage?
I would go somewhere around 10 to 12.
I thought that as well when I was looking into it, but as of the end of 2024, it was actually only 5%.
Oh no!
Which, it's a no, but it also means there's a lot of untapped potential.
Yeah, definitely.
And the good news is that the organisations that own and rent these buildings want to unlock that potential. So a couple of years ago, Centrica polled UK businesses, and half of them said that they would like to generate more renewables on site by early 2027. So the ambition is there, but what do businesses need to be aware of before they go for solar? What reasonably are the benefits they could stand to get? What practicalities do they need to be aware of? And how can they fund all of that? These are some of the things I discussed in our first guest interview, which is with the teams at Kingspan and Zestec Renewables. Here it is in full. Yes, so as we'll have mentioned in the studio, it is great to be focusing on-site solar solutions for this next part of the podcast. And here to help me explore the considerations and practicalities of installing and maintaining on-site solar, I have Robert Guilmartin, who is General Manager for Renovation and Solar Energy Solutions at Kingspan, and Simon Booth, who is CEO at Zestec Renewables. Thank you both so much for your time. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, likewise. Great to be here. Thanks, Sarah.
No, thank you both for taking the time. I think the obvious place to start would be a bit of an introduction to both of yourselves and your businesses and why you're working together and speaking together today.
Sure. So perhaps from a Kingspan perspective, I work within Kingspan Insulated Panels, which is a division within Kingspan Group that specialises in insulated roof and wall panels, daylighting solutions, controlled environments, facade systems and solar PV solutions, which includes our new factory integrated solar roofing product, which we've called Power Panel. So from a Kingspan perspective, naturally roofs, facades and in turn car parks represent a vast underutilised surface that can support on-site renewable energy generation, so bringing energy production closer to the point of consumption. So from our perspective, a more productive use of space than installing solar PV, say in a ground mount or field application if it can be avoided. We're seeing a steady increase in demand for solar PV in general, which is in line with government policy in the UK, Ireland, elsewhere in Europe. However, specifically an increase in demand for applications when clients are renovating their buildings. For commercial industrial buildings, the roof is the critical variable, really. Poor roof insulation causes massive heat loss in winter, solar gain in summer. So installing modern insulated composite panels is typically the highest impact single measure for energy reduction a client can take. However, unfortunately, some customers are choosing to install solar PV as a quick fix solution on an existing roof, which may be 20 plus years old due to capital budget constraints. So the ability to offer our customers and end customers an alternative way of financing a significant contribution towards the roof capex, plus the full cost of the solar PV, is why we have partnered with Simon and his wider team at Zestec and Octopus Energy Generation, who have over a decade in experience developing, managing and funding solar PV solutions in the UK and throughout Europe.
Great, thanks Rob. Let me follow on that one and give a bit of an introduction here to Zestec, where our team have been developing, funding and operating on-site renewable energy infrastructure for commercial and industrial organisations, as you say, for the last 15 years or so. And our role is to help businesses generate renewable electricity directly where it's consumed. And that's without requiring them to deploy capital or worry about managing the long-term operation of the infrastructure themselves. Most projects that we deliver are through long-term power purchase agreements. And in simple terms, we fund, install and operate the solar system, and our client purchases the renewable electricity generated on site. One of the key lessons for us from delivering projects over the last 10 or 15 years is that rooftop solar projects depend just as much on the building as they do on the energy system itself. So roof condition, structural integrity, asset life cycle and safe maintenance access all influence how well systems perform over the long term. And for many commercial buildings, the roof is actually the largest underutilised energy asset on the site. And that's where the relationship with Kingspan becomes particularly powerful. We can deliver integrated roof and solar solutions that support the building fabric and the organisation's decarbonisation strategy over the long term.
Got it. And it's definitely an exciting time to be in this industry. So I've been working with Edie now since 2018. And at that point, when we talked about on-site solar with businesses, at least businesses in the UK, the conversation seemed quite a bit different. It seemed a bit of an ambition, like we might get there one day sort of thing. Whereas now we see a lot more arrays already active and a lot of companies having fully fledged plans to expand on-site solar. So is this just my perception, or has the market for on-site solar really reached this sort of positive turning point in the past few years?
So absolutely, and it's not really a subtle shift. We've moved from solar being a nice to have sustainability gesture perhaps 10 plus years ago to being a core part of how businesses manage their energy demand on site, reduce carbon, operational costs, and in recent years particularly seeing the importance of customers using it to reduce energy costs to remain competitive in their core business. So the motive for installing solar has significantly shifted over time. The volatility of energy prices in recent years and naturally, unfortunately, with the consequences of what is unfolding in the Middle East, is a wake up for many businesses to reduce their energy demand in the first instance and look at low cost alternative sources, with solar PV being the lowest cost generating technology and in turn the quickest on-site solution to deploy this requirement. So for businesses running high daytime demand loads such as logistics hubs or food manufacturers, retailers and so on, the financial savings and predictability of solar, if professionally managed and maintained over the lifetime, is fairly meaningful and significant. Unfortunately, however, traditional solar PV systems are frequently viewed as add-ons or procured retrospectively and or designed late in the construction process compared to the building envelope. So whereby that approach is effective for speed of deployment at scale, it definitely brings complexity and risk to building owners, unfortunately, over time. So from a building envelope perspective, when solar is procured purely on ROI, it fails to consider some of the wider performance criteria, which is naturally critical to long-term success. Bearing in mind the useful lifetime of a PV system is 25 years. So considerations for product quality and interface compatibility with the roofing system and building envelope, product warranties, material supply chain traceability, and in turn, which is a noteworthy point which we see every day, is the design implications for ongoing maintenance of the roofing system and the solar PV system for that 20 plus year lifetime expectancy. So going forward, from a trend perspective, we definitely see a shift towards independently tested solar plus roofing systems versus, unfortunately, what is today a fragmented component level approach to procurement. So a system-based approach improves kind of confidence for designers, insurers, ultimately the building owner, particularly as renewable technology becomes more closely tied to building performance, safety, durability requirements over time. And really that was the genesis of the development of our power panel product, which is an integrated solar and roofing system. using Kingspan's high efficiency quad core insulation and a high efficiency solar PV module integrated in a factory controlled environment. And that system is one of the first globally to be tested to FM approvals 4478 standard, which is fire performance testing, wind uplift resistance testing, hail and gravity. So a comprehensive suite of testing for that interface of the solar PV system plus the building envelope. And in turn, all of the suppliers, the components that we use in the power panel system are independently audited by FM approvals on an annual basis. So you can see how that process is fundamentally different to procuring a PV system based on ROI or a payback of X number of years. So that hopefully gives you a bit of a feel really for how we see the current landscape from a solar perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And I think there's only couple of points I'd add to that one as well, which sort of aligns with the significant acceleration that we have seen in on-site deployment. I think you alluded to rooftops and private wire ground mount systems, but increasingly now solar carports as well. And there's kind of been a real sort of momentum shift for organisations to really look at, are they utilising all of their available space to support some of their decarbonisation objectives? Having been in the industry 15 years plus, I think it's entering a new phase of maturity as well. So the government's Clean Power 2030 action plan calls for a tripling of operational solar capacity to 50 gigawatts and a fourfold increase in battery energy storage to 27 gigawatts. And so being part of this industry with all of the learnings, all of the changes and really the opportunities that it brings for everybody involved to support customers on that generation, I think it's a tremendously exciting place to be.
Got it. And I wanted to touch on whether you see this trend continuing, perhaps due to factors like more specific regulations as well. So Simon, you mentioned Clean Power 2030, which really does sort of light the fire under you, but it is a top level ambition rather than a specific regulation. So do you two see on-site solar adoption continuing? And if so, are there maybe any more specific policies that could contribute to that trend?
Sure, Sarah. So in the UK, we have the minimum energy efficiency standards, which we will learn more about hopefully in the second half of this year. But that obviously brings a concrete compliance obligation for any business or occupier that owns commercial property to improve the fabric of the building. Since April 23, it's been unlawful to let a commercial premises with an EPC rating below an E, and that threshold is expected to significantly increase with the updated guidance later in the year. In Europe, obviously, the regulatory landscape is evolving to a similar effect. We have the latest revision of the EPBD, which brings in requirements that all new buildings designed have to optimize solar energy potential and be capable of hosting solar installations without costly retrospective modifications. So between those two drivers alone, definitely the trend appears it will continue, And really it's where solar and the building fabric improvements become deeply connected because solar PV can contribute meaningfully to an EPC uplift, but it's rarely sufficient on its own. So businesses that are approaching solar as part of a wider building energy efficiency strategy, addressing the insulation, the roof condition alongside generation, are the ones who are really moving the needle on their EPC rating in a durable and meaningful way. And we're also seeing sustainability leaders increasingly framing solar investment not just as a decarbonisation action, but as part of the minimum energy efficiency compliance roadmap, which is a logical and integrated way to approach the problem. On the landlord side, it's clear that prime EPC compliant buildings are achieving higher rental yields and occupier demand, and secondary assets failing to meet EPC thresholds are naturally experiencing decline demand and increase in vacancy rates. Owner occupiers are then in turn benefiting from the increase in asset value from proactively improving their building envelope on-site solar development. So yeah, trend definitely looks like it will continue. And then there are also, in parallel to that, Sarah, in Europe and in the UK, as Simon has mentioned, very specific solar generation targets.
I think I'd come in there, Rob, with one additional point, which is talking about grid, which is often a sort of comment for debate across the industry. And in some regions, organisations are finding it very difficult to secure additional grid capacity for new demand. And so whilst we have got some grid connection reforms that are aiming to accelerate deployment timelines, this is still a real challenge for the industry. And so being able to generate some electricity locally can help alleviate some of these pressures.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm hearing a lot more noise around foreshore, and the reforms on that are, ongoing. So watch this space. And I wanted to ask, from what I've heard from both of you, the market is clearly much more mature now than a few years ago, due to a combination of factors, whether that is demands from different people up and down the value chain or whether it is regulation. So with that in mind, when businesses or other organisations that are looking at on-site solar coming to you guys as their solutions provider, what sort of questions are they now asking?
Yeah, I think the market maturity over the last 15 years really starts to play out with the sorts of conversations and the approach that organisations are taking to considering on-site solar as part of their renewable mix. And I would say sophisticated buyers is a term that we see more now. We see more procurement-led processes where actually organisations are starting to think not just for their one particular site in the UK, but across Europe or across other jurisdictions, and then looking at actually how can they bring uniformity and consistency across those territories as well. So it's a very different landscape when you start having those conversations. And a big part of that we see as well now relates to how do we ensure that solar supply chains meet ethical sourcing and modern slavery requirements? That's something that rightly has gained a lot more focus and a lot more awareness over the last few years. And organisations like the Solar Stewardship Initiative, are really doing some great work to try and raise the awareness of responsible sourcing and the policies that underpin that. And so really thinking about traceability, transparency, ESG performance, it's no longer a sort of tick box that maybe it was a few years ago. It really does underpin some of the key value elements to supply chain. Module efficiency is often one of those sort of questions that we get asked from clients looking for, let's say, significant performance improvements in outputs from solar modules. And I think the sort of conversation we have with them there is that the rate of improvement here, it's incremental rather than transformational. So, we are seeing gains, but, it's a few tenths of a percent per year at a module level. As organisations start to think a bit more holistically, battery energy storage, EV chargers, EV charging infrastructure, how can organisations be able to integrate that as part of a more sort of holistic procurement process? Information that's let's say provided and available from operating PV systems again is something that we're seeing even more now. It's not just a case of when the industry was in its infancy, putting a PV system up on a roof and expecting and hoping that it would perform. It's now actually being able to prove that it is performing in line with those expectations. But also, I think, and this comes back to some of the conversations with Kingspan, is it's really about designing systems on the right buildings with the right infrastructure so that the maintenance and the management of those systems is being considered for that 25 to 30 year life cycle. Those are probably some of the kind of key elements we see coming out. You get the sort of usual landlord tenant questions about responsibilities, lease terms, how energy generated on site can be used effectively across those types of structures, and that's becoming more commonplace now. But I would say if I tried to wrap it up, the conversation has certainly shifted from simply how much does it cost to how is the system going to perform operationally and commercially over its full life cycle.
Great. So it's really interesting to hear about the details that people are asking about, but I also wanted to ask about what factors people are still neglecting to initially consider when they're planning for and installing solar. So I know that both of you earlier on mentioned that some people might still be turning to solar for a quick fix and not necessarily considering other things about the building and the roof, or they might be considering solar, a little bit too late in some cases. So what are the common pitfalls that you see that you'd like to see people preempt a bit more, or that you advise around quite often?
So there's definitely, I would say, a tendency to view solar in isolation rather than part of a wider energy strategy in a lot of cases. And we're definitely seeing the businesses that get the most from the installation in terms of performance and reduced OPEX costs over time are those who consider reducing the demand in the first place, so trying to reduce the energy demand within the building in the first instance. And solar works very well as one pillar, really, as part of that integrated approach to energy efficiency as opposed to a standalone solution. The sequence of works, I think, Sarah, and the planning really matters, and getting it wrong can have, significantly increased cost over time. So by way of example, a solar installation done before there may need to be re-roofing in the near future would naturally involve dismantling the solar PV system and would have a significant impact on the assumed initial return on investment, not to mention the business disruption over time. So the system-based approach really naturally generally improves outcomes, and that obviously helps align designers, the insurance company that may be involved with the building owner. And as solar becomes closely aligned to the core building performance, it decreases the site complexity. It generally can help as well with build program and cost reduction, construction cost reduction of risk, whether that be health and safety on site and on an ongoing basis, and in turn coordinating the works. And Simon touched on it there, the importance of maintenance and professional maintenance and monitoring over time. So the coordination of works really, and that holistic integrated approach from our perspective is extremely important.
I think where I'd add to that is procurement approach from organisations and internal alignment between their key stakeholders. And we see great examples where organisations come to market having really thought through and considered their approach to looking to develop their own on-site solar, and they're able to therefore, as a result, take a very well structured, scripted brief out to the industry. And as a result, that makes their job of being able to do analysis and evaluation of sort of bidders' responses in a more efficient way. We certainly try and encourage that approach across clients and organisations, because the flip side to that is where you see organisations coming to market whose main business is not on-site solar, and what they're trying to do is potentially use a mechanism that they do in their own core business and not provide a huge amount of detail or information, and therefore largely leave organisations to their own devices to go off and determine whether it's this system size. They don't specify a particular yield modelling tool. They leave the sort of financial structuring piece open and not really kind of giving too much guidance. And without a really clear framework, those organisations, from our experience, tend to struggle. And so the more preparedness that those organisations can go through, it can really help them expedite the process a lot more efficiently. And where they've then got their internal stakeholders all aligned to run through a process, you can cut something down that, in our experience, we've seen some that take years down to some that take 3 to 6 months. So we would certainly encourage clients to think more holistically before they actually come to market.
Got it. And we've covered a lot here about what happens during construction and installation and before we even get to that point. But as you mentioned, everyone really wants to see their arrays performing in practice. So what practicalities do businesses need to be aware of in terms of operations and maintenance when they've got their own solar?
Great question that we spend quite a bit of time talking to clients about here, where you're investing or somebody else is investing through a financial mechanism, piece of infrastructure that is due to operate for 25 to 30 years. So yeah, absolutely. What is going to happen over that entire life cycle, and who's responsible for operating it, and what does that entail? And so back when the industry was in its infancy, I think solar was viewed as a fit and forget. You put it up on your roof, you don't really need to worry about it. That absolutely is not the case. And insurers have obviously kind of got a lot more involved in specifications and also ongoing maintenance and monitoring over the years as well. So making sure there is a properly structured regime around actually looking after the kit once it's installed, including cleaning. You can have different frequencies of cleaning for different locations and different applications. But active monitoring of system performance is absolutely critical as well, because if somebody isn't monitoring it and a piece of the kit goes down or it fails, you're just not going to know. So that active monitoring is super important. We talked about through the design and then the installation, planning for safe roof access, post-construction, and local coordination with sort of on-site facilities teams as well, to make sure that those systems can be accessed by maintenance teams. Integration with wider energy infrastructure as well is really important, because how's the organisation looking to potentially integrate battery storage as part of its sort of evolution and development? Is it looking to electrify its fleet, and therefore there's going to be more requirements for EV infrastructure? So it's not just a case of installing a system, plugging it in and off it goes. It's understanding some of the client drivers and objectives. I mean, ultimately, what are we seeing? Most electricity demand across our clients is evolving. Most businesses expect their demand to increase, and electrifying heating systems and as another move away from gas is something we kind of see and hear a lot more. And so in that context, on-site solar, where it's supported by battery storage and flexible energy infrastructure, becomes a strategic asset that supports the broader electrification and decarbonisation of the site.
Anything from Rob to add on that one?
Just a couple of points. Sarah and Simon covered it obviously very comprehensively, but I think the key point is that solar PV is definitely low maintenance, but not maintenance free. So it is a key consideration for the building owner over time. And from our perspective, really, the funded solution takes away a lot of the operational hassle of solar PV performance over time, because that is naturally managed by a third party, such as Simon and the team at Zestec. The final consideration will just be, which we have seen unfortunately happen many times, is the need to access roofing systems underneath the solar PV. So there's the maintenance of the solar in itself, but also there's a wider consideration, again, back to the building envelope. How do you maintain the roofing system in conjunction with the solar PV?
Got it. And we've covered so much ground and really gotten into, I think, some of the specifics of exploring on-site solar, but obviously we can't cover everything in this short amount of time we have on this podcast. So for our listeners who are looking to explore on-site solar solutions and find the right fit for them, what steps can they take next?
Sarah, perhaps with the pending changes to minimum energy efficiency standards, whether that's in Europe or in the UK, our recommendation will be that definitely the sequence of works matter, and to take a holistic approach, thinking of solar as one pillar as part of the overall energy efficiency upgrade, and in turn how it'll be managed in the future. If capital budgets don't allow for the roof fabric renovation works or roof upgrade works, we'd encourage customers to naturally explore alternative financing methods, but actually using the solar generation and the associated savings as the lever to support paying for the building fabric upgrades. And the question really for most business owners is no longer that does it make sense, it's just making sure that it's the right approach for that building, and it's designed appropriately, not only for the short and medium term, but the long term, i.e. the 20-25 plus years useful life of the system. So if there's any other questions or people would like to know more about our solutions or products, whether that's Kingspan's and or Zestec's, we have a lot of information online, and or people are more than welcome to reach out to Simon and I directly.
Great, thank you. And that is unfortunately all of the time that we have for this part of the Sustainability Uncovered podcast. So thank you both so much for taking the time this afternoon.
No, thank you, Sarah, for the invitation to have the discussion. Much appreciated.
Likewise, thanks very much.
Big thank you once again to Robert and Simon for their time. And can I just say I really enjoyed doing that interview because I love getting to interview people with an Irish accent. Like Robert, I'm completely biased. We're going to take a very short break now, so join us after the jingle for an exclusive discussion with Bruce Douglas, CEO of the Global Renewables Alliance. Hello and welcome back to Sustainability Uncovered with me, Sarah, and also with Sidhi.
Hello.
So after looking at the picture for on-site solar in Europe in the first half of this episode, we can now broaden our focus and look at the rollout of all kinds of renewables across the world. So this has been a focus for a couple of years. At COP28 in Dubai in 2023, dozens of countries collectively signed a pledge to triple the world's renewable energy generation capacity by 2030. As we've already discussed in this episode, the world has changed significantly since then. So, Sidhi, do you want to tell us about our next guest interviewee?
Yeah, so I spoke to Bruce Douglas, who's the Chief Executive of the Global Renewables Alliance, and we basically looked at the progress that the industry has seen since 2023 when the goal of tripling renewables by 2030 was agreed by the nations, and then also like how since then the political atmosphere has changed and what the Trump effect essentially has meant for the global energy transition, and then looking at AI and data centers as well, because there's such a growing focus for countries now. So how does that fit in within the transition picture? And lastly, and more importantly, a just transition case as well. So how the GRA is working with energy companies, manufacturing companies in Southeast Asia, Latin America, to make sure that these nations, the transition doesn't mean just digging holes in these countries, but also creating that manufacturing capacity and de-risking markets in these areas as well. So it was a great conversation. And then Bruce also talked about what are the next goals for the Alliance in the coming months, looking at Colombia as well. So it was just a fantastic conversation. I'm excited for our listeners to listen to it.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear it. Lots of ground to cover there, it sounds like. So here it is in full, Sidhi's interview with Bruce Douglas, CEO of the GRA.
Bruce, for those in our audience who might not be familiar with your work or the GRA's mission, could you please kick us off with a quick introduction?
Yeah, thanks, Sidhi, and great pleasure to be on your podcast. Thanks for the invitation. So yeah, I've been working in renewable energy for like over 25 years now, mainly in the non-profit and advocacy sector. And we established the Global Renewables Alliance 3 years ago to be the single voice for renewable energy internationally. So we're exclusively private sector, representing thousands of companies around the world, different geographies, different technologies, but of course focused on the clean energy transition.
It's great to have that context. Looking back at COP28 in 2023, which felt like a watershed moment for the global renewable energy sector, there was this ambitious goal that countries agreed to, which is to triple renewables by 2030. Now we're deep into 2026. How the global rollout actually is looking at this point? Where are we seeing the real wins, and where's the pace still lagging?
Yeah, so in fact COP28 was an incredibly important moment in the energy transition. And what that means in concrete terms is to reach over 11,000 gigawatts of installed capacity by 2030. And that's, ambitious, but also achievable. We are on the way to tripling. We're closing the gap towards that. But it's important to note that it's still not happening fast enough. And we see that last year, again, we break records every year. Last year was another record installation of over 580 gigawatts annually, and that's forecast to increase to 800 gigawatts in 2025 and possibly the same in 2026. It's still not fast enough. IRENA, so our partners in the tracking of this tripling goal, estimate that that percentage still needs to increase in order to get to the tripling. And again, to put it in context, so the 11,000 gigawatts means 3 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity added every day and connected between now and 2030. So that's 3,000 megawatts of new renewable capacity. So it's quite significant. Now, where's it happening and where's it not? I mean, clearly China is leading the race and installing the vast majority of new renewables globally. But there's also some significant uptake in many other markets. Pakistan, for example, in solar. Brazil, also high penetration of renewables. In Africa as well, we're starting to see a solar and storage pick up. And of course in Europe, offshore wind and wind generally is still a leading technology.
It is encouraging to hear about those successes, but we have to talk about the elephant in the room. There's been a lot of chatter about the Trump effect, stalling global momentum. So beyond the headlines of withdrawn US subsidies or domestic wind farm hurdles, is that really the biggest threat that we face right now, or are there deeper, more systemic challenges that we should be worrying about?
To summarize, I suppose the two challenges we have to the accelerated energy transition, and just to note, as I said before, that this is happening. It's happening fast. It's now inevitable. It's unstoppable, the energy transition. It's just a question of how fast it takes place. But I suppose the two main barriers we face, and this is really summarizing it, is the distortion of policies and the distortion of the narrative. And policies can be things like tariffs, taxation, regulatory frameworks, permitting, and so on that slow down, derail, delay the renewable deployment. And the second is the distortion of narrative. So this is disinformation. So this is active pushback in the communication space against the energy transition. So both of those do have an effect. I have to say that although the narrative is, anti-climate, anti-renewable, in the real economy, and this is the good news, is that we're deploying more renewables than ever. So 90% of new power additions last year were renewable energy. And the reason for that is they're just cheaper. So they're faster and cheaper than the fossil fuel alternative. And so the economics now is really dictating the pace of change and the technology choice. The energy system does not obey ideology, it obeys economics, and that's exactly what you're seeing. And so in all countries, and in fact the US as well, we're seeing record deployment of renewables. So in the US last year, this year, and we forecast also next year, there will be a record deployment of renewable energy, outpacing new gas and certainly new coal.
No, that's really interesting to hear. And one of the other systemic hurdles that, again, may be a result of policy challenges is the hardware. So you can build the turbines, but they need a home. How is the progress shaping up for all the backbone of the transition? Now I'm thinking grid investment, battery storage, and just that crucial long duration storage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great you raised that, Sidhi, because, although we're renewable advocates, we lobby more for grids and storage now than we do for renewable energy. In many markets around the world, the constraint is the moving of the abundant green electrons in time and location. So in time using storage, and as you say, we represent the Global Renewables Alliance, not just the generation technologies, so wind, solar, hydro, and geothermal, but also storage of all durations. So short duration batteries to move it from midday to the evening, but also long duration, moving it in days, weeks, and even seasons, which is critical to the energy transition. There's no way we can reach the tripling goal without significant increase in storage. And as you point out, the grid infrastructure. So that's both new grids, transmission and distribution, but better use of existing grids. And the existing grids can be optimized to increase their capacities. So those two things is the things we're working on a lot, and that's in all markets, to ease the connection of renewables, to decrease curtailment. The IEA, who projected that over 3,000 gigawatts of renewable projects are waiting for grid connection. So that's like almost more than a third of the target by 2030. So that, the grid and storage piece, is the flexibility solutions that we urgently need.
Can you please elaborate on what are the biggest challenges right now to that expansion of the flexibility and storage issues in the sector? I'm being reminded of this white paper that I recently covered from Barclays, which argued that a lot of the industry and many of their clients are now in this delivery mode. So they've seen renewables are cheaper now, and then it's great, there's a lot of generation happening, but in how to then embed it into the system and that systemic challenges. I think gradually the industry is catching up and that mindset of embedding it into the system is happening, but I would be really interested to hear what you think are the key challenges right now.
Yeah, and you rightly point out that we have the technology, so we don't need to invent the future. We already have invented the technologies, and someone, I don't know who the quote can be associated to, but I think it was the Saudi energy minister who said the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. We just invented better tools. And that's exactly the case now in the energy system. We just have better solutions than the old fossil fuel alternative. And so on the storage space, of course, we have cheap and getting cheaper batteries at scale, but also we have a number of really key long duration storage solutions. Pumped hydro, but also chemical heat storage solutions. The barriers, or let's say, how do we unlock those at scale, are linked to policies. So we need long-term, stable policy frameworks. These are investments, same as grids, which are multi-decade in duration. So, the return on investment is 20, 30 years. So they need long-term, stable policy frameworks. Also, long-term contracts, which value flexibility. So many of the markets, electricity markets around the world, don't value flexibility enough or in the right way. So that goes for batteries, but other flexibility solutions such as demand-side response. And I think that is the key, is how do you adequately value and monetize the benefits of storage and flexibility more broadly.
That's interesting. Staying on the topic of demand and technology for another minute, we're seeing this fascinating clash with big tech and the rapid AI rollout. These hyperscalers want 24/7 carbon-free energy, but they're hitting grid queues that are 3 to 5 years long. Is the GRA nudging these tech giants to move away from isolated behind-the-meter projects and instead champion something like grid-enhancing technologies that help everyone?
I wouldn't say it was a clash with the hyperscalers, and we've been working with them for many years on the provision of clean, firm power. When we spoke to them 3 years, 5 years ago, they were requesting clean, cheap, fast, firm, in that order. So, they were still focused on clean and cheap. Now when we speak to them, they want fast, firm, clean, cheap, in that order. So, they're focusing really on speed to connection and firm. The answer to either of those two questions is always renewable energy. So renewable energy is still the fastest and cheapest way to get power to the data centers. There's a fascinating project just announced last week by Google in the US, which is the sort of co-location of wind and solar, plus long duration storage, which provides round-the-clock firm, renewable, clean power to their new data center. And so there's a lot of solutions out there. There's a way to do it. Of course, the hype is the size of the power demand increase. My personal opinion is that it's overstated, especially outside the US. We're looking at power demand increases from air conditioning, from electrification, where I think should be prioritized. And so if you're looking at, where should your power go? If you can choose, then ideally it should go for air conditioning and improving human services rather than the data centers. There's also electrification of end-use sectors, so electrification of transport, heating and industry, which directly decarbonize, provide clean power and so on. So, of course, there is a need for power for data centers, but if you're going to build new power demand into that, it has to be clean. It has to be renewable power. So I think there's a huge opportunity with the new data centers for bringing on new power demand renewable, but also with the use of AI in the energy system, optimizing the use of the grid, forecasting better the wind and solar resources, and so on. So there's a huge opportunity there as well. I think US is an exception where, the power demand increase is so vast from data centers and their rush to gas power for those data centers is real. But outside the US, I sense that it's going to be still quite a lot of renewable power being brought online. And we have other challenges / opportunities, which is air conditioning and electrification.
Looking beyond the US and transitioning the segment now to the how part of this rollout, there's a valid fear that the green energy revolution might just be replacing one extraction only model with another. So how is the Alliance ensuring that in places like Southeast Asia and Latin America, we aren't just digging holes, but we're also fostering local manufacturing?
For the clean energy transition, we do need to extract critical minerals to manufacture the hardware. But the difference in scale between what we need to extract and what the fossil fuel industry is extracting now is vast. So we use significantly less, and the materials we use go into manufacturing hardware which generate for 20, 30, 40 years and that can then be recycled. So batteries, for example, can now be recycled up to 99% of the materials, and they're currently approaching 70, 75% of that potential, but they can be recycled. So there's a circular economy effect that comes into effect. So extract it once and then use it pretty much forever. And the scale of extraction is multiples smaller than the fossil fuel requirement to extract the gas, oil and coal that's needed. So I'd say yes, we do still need to extract, but it's much smaller.
And can you expand a little bit more about how GRA is making sure that benefits of this transition in terms of manufacturing and creating that local infrastructure and jobs and revenue is also well dispersed in other regions of the global south as well, so like Southeast Asia and Latin America? What are the plans there?
Sure. So in terms of manufacturing, China does dominate in most of the technologies at the moment, but we're strongly supporting the move to have regional hubs for manufacturing. So yeah, you could have solar panel and wind manufacturing in India, for example, for parts of Asia. You could have, some countries in Africa being a hub for manufacturing. And we're seeing now Brazil manufacturing blades and turbines and so on. So yeah, there's an opportunity there. And we see that as the demand increases in those regions, there's the opportunity for local manufacturing, local supply chains. And what we say is, the renewable energy revolution is bringing about a significant shift in jobs, growth and security. So job creation through the project deployment, operational maintenance, but also, as you point out, the manufacturing. We want to make sure when we do that it's sustainable. And so our members have set up various different initiatives. There's the Solar Stewardship Initiative, the Wind Sustainability Initiative and the Hydropower Sustainability Alliance, which ensure that, when those products are manufactured, from cradle to grave, there is some sustainability criteria associated with it to make sure that we're not making the mistakes of the fossil fuel era.
Which brings us to this question about money. In many emerging markets, the cost of capital is still sitting at 10 to 15%, whereas Europe enjoys a 4 to 6% rate. De-risking is a great buzzword, but what specific mechanisms is the GRA pushing for right now this year to actually bring those interest rates down for the global south?
Yeah, and first of all, financing is a really key issue for us, for GRA and the energy transition. We've been working on various topics and analysis over the last couple of years. One is on the difference between equity and debt. Our analysis shows that 70% of the required financing should come from debt and the remainder from equity. The reason that's important is because they require inherently different input risks and incentives. On the cost of capital in emerging markets, this is a serious barrier to project development. And so there's three main parts to that. One is risk reduction, second is market confidence, and the third is stable policies in innovation. So first of all, on risk reduction, in order to reduce risk, and being very quite specific about this now, there is an issue with perceived risk versus actual risk. And what I mean by that is the perception in the market prices capital higher than it should be versus the actual default rates of those emerging markets. And many emerging markets have default rates lower than developed economies. That should be transparently shown and that would automatically reduce the interest rates, the cost of capital. The second is things can be done with guarantees to provide cover for off-taker risk. If the trust and risk associated with off-takers is high, governments and public bodies can provide some level of guarantee. And the final one I'll touch on is currency risk. So risk reduction through local currency and hedging facilities. We need a transparent overhaul of the financial system, for EMDEs to have the opportunities that the developed world has had. And and public money needs to be put in. So that's from governments, but also from regional development banks, multilateral development banks. The big financial institutions need to put some money in to blend it with private finance. The vast majority of financing in renewable energy comes from the private sector. I think traditionally it's about more than 80% of the financing comes from the private sector. And we and our members are ready to deploy trillions of dollars. But as you say, the cost of capital needs to be right. The return on investment needs to be right. And typical risk reward for renewables used to be, low risk, low return, whereas fossil fuels was high risk, high return. And it seems to be moving towards, fossils having a lower risk and higher return and renewables having a higher risk and lower return. So we need to balance that out. There's so many things in the market that distort it. Touched on them earlier. On the policy side, tariffs, taxes, subsidies. Fossil fuel subsidies is really the elephant in the room. $7 trillion of indirect fossil fuel subsidies per year, which distort that market. It's not a level playing field. So we need to balance that. We need to reform some of the financial methodologies and innovate around that. This is a very exciting market with huge opportunities. And so I think we're seeing some changes taking place, and we're confident that emerging markets will have the opportunities that developed countries have had for so long and benefit from the significant opportunities that renewables can present.
Sounds like a packed agenda for the GRA right now. As we look forward to the rest of the year and then eventually COP31 in Turkey, what is the Alliance's main North Star for the coming months?
For the coming months, we're in discussion with the COP31 presidencies in Australia and Turkey, and of course with the previous COP30 president, and I met the COP30 president last week in Paris at the IEA meeting, and he's very focused on, first of all, the roadmap away from fossil fuels, so putting out a report on that. There'll be an event in Colombia in April on that. But for the COP itself, we are focusing quite strongly on electrification this year. We see that as a huge opportunity to change the energy system. We've spoken to a lot of governments and they're very keen to pursue that. And again, it's not a developed countries exclusive opportunity. You see EV growth in Ethiopia is quite significant. They've actually banned internal combustion engines. In Brazil, electrification of industry and industry clusters around large renewable resources. And so in Africa, the same thing, industry development with electrification and the two-wheeler electrification for road transport. So there's a huge opportunity there. EMBA estimate that 75% of the energy system can already be electrified with current technologies, and with new technologies that could increase even further to 80-90% of the energy system. So that's a huge opportunity. We'll be pushing for increased ambition this year. We're looking at a target of 35% of electrification by 2035 could be possible, unlocking enormous opportunity for consumers, both residential consumers on transport and heating, but also industrial consumers with electrification. The efficiency gains with the end-use consumption switching to electrification are quite enormous.
This is all now really, really interesting. Unfortunately, I think this is all the time that we have for this segment. So thank you so much for your time today, Bruce. I found it personally very fascinating to get this look behind the curtain of how the global transition is playing out. So thank you again so much. I will hand it over back to the edie team in the studio now.
Thanks to Bruce once again for his time. So that brings our guest interviews for this episode to an end. I really enjoyed looking at the realities and the practicals of the renewables rollout beyond, the many headlines that there are about energy at the moment. But before Sidhi and I sign off for this episode, we have a few things to flag with you. So regarding our first interview with Kingspan and Zestec, we do have a recording of a recent webinar on the on-site solar topic on our site now. So that's free to access. So if your organisation is exploring, installing or updating its solar, do check out our events page. And regarding what we have coming up at Edie, we're recording this in the last few days before our biggest face-to-face event of the year, Edie 26. This is taking place on March 25th and 26th in London. We'll be convening more than 1,000 sustainability, energy and ESG leaders for 2 days of not just sitting and looking at PowerPoints, but actually networking, workshopping and getting hands on. So we'd love to see you there. If you're listening before March 25th, it is your final few days. Sidhi, anything else coming up from you for our listeners to look out for?
Yeah, so in terms of content, I think the land use framework by our government will be out by the time this episode goes live, but we'll have plenty of resources live on our site for when it comes out and when you want to navigate and explore what it really means for you as a business. And then, making sense of the energy markets as everything unravels. So I think that's what we'll be doing. And then the FCA is soon to be done with a consultation on what SRS would mean in terms of TCFD and wider reporting. So when that comes, I'll also be on our agenda to unpack for our audience. So lots happening.
Yeah, there's never a dull moment. And then regarding the next episode of Sustainability Uncovered, we'll be exploring what the next generation of good corporate sustainability strategies will look like, from businesses putting nature on the board to unprecedented levels of collaboration for progressive policy engagement and unlocking really innovative funding. So looking forward to hosting that one in April. But for today, it's a goodbye from Sidhi.
Goodbye.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.